I'm Catherine and I'm a history teacher, and this short video is to help all history applicants write their personal statements. So when you come to actually writing the personal statement, I think it really helps to give it some shape in your head. That way it's just not an infinitely scary, infinitely blank page, but it has more of a substance to it. Think of it maybe as a bookshelf that just needs filling. If you're applying to Oxbridge and are therefore likely to have an interview, then about 3/4 of your personal statement should focus on your academic interests and be the basis for the discussion in that interview. The rest will be about your extracurricular involvement and maybe wider school responsibilities, but that's really for the benefit of the other universities that you'll be applying to that will have other admissions criteria. So it's not honestly going to make much difference to Oxbridge tutors to talk about your music exams, unless you're doing music of course, or even being a head boy of your school, being a prefect, that kind of thing, even D.A.V., that's not going to make any difference to the decision whether to accept you. It doesn't mean that there aren't vibrant extracurricular activities going on once you get there. Of course there are loads of things and they're run by students, but tutors don't get much involved with those sorts of things and probably won't really care. So 3/4 has got to focus on your academic interests, and the rest is for the benefit of other universities that will be more interested, some of them will be more interested in your extracurricular stuff. But the bookcase metaphor is not just a metaphor. You have to think to yourself, what are bookcases filled with? Well, of course, books. And it really is important to have a lot of books. I say a lot, I don't mean more than you can cope with in terms of preparation, as I explained before, but you have to give a sense that you are somebody who is very used to reading books, because that's what you'll be doing in your history degree, and the tutors will only really take you seriously if you come across as somebody who has read quite a number of proper academic books. So you need to include quite a few, but not more than you can cope with in terms of preparation. You also need to remember that it's not just what you've read or what lectures or podcasts you've listened to, but it's what you've done with those sources of input that will really interest them. Anybody can just list a load of books that they've read or claim to have been to various lectures, but actually what will single you out is your ability to talk about what it made you think about, what surprised you about that book, what did it highlight to you, what did it lead you on to read, what surprised you, as I've said before. So there are lots of different angles that you can take on the things that you want to demonstrate you've read, but it really isn't enough to just say that you've read something. It's what you've done with it, how it prompted your academic journey, your journey onto the next thing that really matters. So you're going to mention a good number of serious academic history books. But remember, anybody can just list a load of books or name drop a bunch of historians or claim that they've attended various lectures. What the tutors are much more interested in is what you made of those books, what they made you think about, what they made you go on to read more about, what they made you question. So you need to come across as a kind of thoughtful, critical reader. But by critical, we've got to be careful here, because critical could often shade into being very negative, and if you put things in too strident and negative way, it can come across as very arrogant. For example, if you said, supposing you've read Eric Foner's book on Republican ideology, Free Soil, Free Labour, Free Men. Supposing you said, I totally disagree with Eric Foner's idea of Republican ideology being tantamount to Marxism. Now this is the kind of thing I've read on people's personal statements, and it comes over as ridiculous. What you're doing is you're completely dismissing one of the world authorities on the Republican Party. You are also taking a very cheap swipe at one of the most complex thinkers there has ever been in Karl Marx. So it's not going to look good. So what you've got to do instead is you've got to try and come across as somebody who is respectful of the books that they've read, but doesn't think of the historians as being as writing their ideas sort of on tablets of stone for posterity. Instead, they're taking part in an ongoing academic debate, and you are tentatively venturing into that debate a bit yourself. So you're saying, you know, I was very interested in so-and-so's ideas on this, they made me think a bit more about this, I wasn't entirely convinced by that. That's about as far as you can go in terms of sort of negative type criticism. Often, to show that you have read and really engaged with a book, it's tempting to write something like this. Robert Service portrays Soviet communism as a system which relied on extreme oppression. The problem here is you've got to think about your reader. Your reader will be an academic historian. She might well be a colleague of Robert Service's. She might have reviewed his book. She's very, very likely to have read it, even if her period is nothing to do with this. So you don't really need to tell her what Robert Service's book says. You don't need to rewrite the blurb on the back of Robert Service's book. But a very small grammatical adjustment can make it seem a lot less irritating to the tutor reading it. Consider this. I was interested in Robert Service's emphasis on the reliance of Soviet communism on extreme repression. That way you're talking about you. You're not talking about Robert Service. It's you they're interested in, not Robert Service. They want to see that you've engaged with his book and you've shown them that without irritating them by appearing to teach them something. So to give another example of this, I've got one here, you could easily write, Anthony Beevor uses a narrative style to present a compelling and dramatic account of the Battle of Stalingrad. Yes, he does, but they probably know that. They've almost certainly read Anthony Beevor's book. So switch it around and say, I was impressed by Anthony Beevor's use of narrative to present a compelling and dramatic account of the Battle of Stalingrad. You've made the same point, you've showed engagement with the book, you've opened it up for discussion, but you haven't come across as somebody who is teaching these academics what they do for a living. So you also have to avoid the impression of teaching them something when bringing up topics of historical interest, not just books. And an example of this could be here. Women played a more important role in the Tudor court than was once thought. Well, all academics will know that, so what you need to do is rephrase it to say something like, I am very interested in our evolving understanding of the role women played in the Tudor court. I would always say get the 4 areas of academic interest section written before worrying about the rest of the personal statement. When you come onto the rest, you will find it much easier in the main. So first of all, you need to think about your other A-level subjects and how they've fed into your study of history. So for example, if you've studied English, that will have given you an increased ability to analyse the nuances of texts. If you have studied maths, that will give you greater confidence with the quantitative aspects of history. If you've studied languages, then that will expand the variety of primary documents that you will have access to as a history student. If you have studied music and art, that will have given you a whole different dimension to understanding a particular period, and one that isn't often emphasised at A-level. All the sciences may seem quite far removed from history, but they all have a very rigorous methodology, and that's also very important with history. So you can link virtually every academic subject to history. And the same with extracurricular activities. If you can link any of them to your study of history, then that's great. So for example, if you've done a lot of debating, you might have found that it's improved your ability to convey an argument economically and persuasively, which is very important in history. You also need to give a sense of your other extracurricular interests, and a lot of people find that there isn't very much room for this, that there just isn't room to sort of list everything that they've done. And if that's the case with you, what I'd do is try and sort of give a sense of the sweep of it. So say that you've taken part in a wide variety of school activities, from football to lighting and sound in drama, or something like that, just to give a sense that you're a rounded person, and that's for your other institutions that you're applying to, not so much for Oxford and Cambridge. Okay, so now we're on to the most difficult parts of the personal statement, which are the first sentence and the last sentence. So with the first sentence, as I've said before, you have to resist all temptation to be pretentious, and you have to resist all temptation to sort of put your finger on what the essence of history is, because the academics will have their own ideas on that. But what you do need to do is you need to think about your connection with history. So there are huge numbers of different reasons for people studying history. History means a huge variety of different things to different people. But what draws you to it? It could be that you really like the combination of creativity with a rigorous approach, or it could be that something in your life has really brought home to you the value of understanding the past in order to combat injustices in the present. There could be any number of things that have drawn you to history. It might be, and it's absolutely fine to say this, that your interest in history was sparked by something that happened a few years ago, for example, a trip to Berlin, a school trip to Berlin when you were about 14, or an oral history project that you took part in as a volunteer, something that first convinced you that history was something really worth studying. That's fine. What I would avoid though is going right back in time and saying that you have been subscribing to the History Today magazine since you were 5, or you were running around in nappies reciting the Magna Carta. That doesn't sound very plausible, so resist the temptation to say that. So very importantly, when you finish writing your personal statement, you then have to read it over to yourself and perhaps get a friend or a teacher or a parent to read it over as well, and try and put yourself in the mind of the tutor interviewing you, because this statement may well form the basis for at least one of your interviews. What questions naturally arise from what you've written? For example, if you've said that you've really enjoyed reading David Blight's fantastic biography of Frederick Douglass, you may be asked for your opinions on biography as a form of historical writing. What are the pros and cons of biography? So think it through, what will naturally arise from what you've written. See if you can see whether you've set yourself any traps. Has something you've said, is it likely to lead somewhere that you don't really want to talk about? And if so, change it while you still have a chance. And one final thought. Don't ever send off anything that doesn't sound authentically like you. Okay, a more academic version of you than the normal version of you, but still you. If anything grates on you or sounds artificial or contrived, then rephrase it. A lot of the worst examples of cringeworthy sentences on personal statements that I've read turn out not to have been written by the student themselves, but by a supposedly well-meaning advisor, a parent or a teacher, or somebody who thinks they have the student's best interests at heart, but have actually put words into their mouth that sound artificial. So make sure it sounds authentically like your own voice.